basically the design came down to how do I bring the EVM in a decentralized fashion to Bitcoin. Yeah. And if you read the white paper, that's the basics of what I wanted to do. That's what I realized like a year and a half ago or something, and that's where we wanted to build towards. And basically having that limited design space forced us to come up with what's now called the spider chain.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Today we are here with Willem Schroé. I think I pronounced that correct. Please correct me if
That's correct.
I didn't. Cool, excellent. I'm sorry, I said Willem, who is from Belgium. And he is here today to talk about spider chains on Bitcoin, his company Botanix, what they're working on, bringing the Ethereum Virtual Machine to Bitcoin, and being able to use Bitcoin as a platform for maybe, decentralized apps and things that right now not necessarily be built on the Bitcoin blockchain. But we'll get into that a little bit more as we go. To give a quick introduction, I met Willem at a meetup at PubKey, a Bitcoin-themed bar here in New York City. The conversation was about drive chains, technology that was coming to Bitcoin. A lot of people in the audience that night did not seem to be so keen on drive chains or these side chains or this technology coming to Bitcoin. And I noticed this one guy who was sort of quiet but quite intelligent sitting, a few seats away from me. And I walked up to him and started talking to him. And that guy is here with us today. That's Willem. He had a lot of really brilliant things to say. I wish he sort of spoke up more in that conversation. So I wanted to give him an opportunity here to maybe share some things that maybe the crowd wasn't so ready to hear that night. As a quick, some background on Willem from what he's told me, he was born and raised in Belgium, studied cryptography from a young age. A really fun fact, he actually studied at a school in Belgium where David Chaum, who created the first version of digital cash, which was called DigiCash in 1982, used to lecture, I think, maybe guest lecture or lecture. Willem said he didn't talk to many people when he was younger, so he was studying a lot, very sort of maybe inside his own head. At some point, you said you moved to Saudi Arabia, were working there. You then eventually came over to, you did your undergrad degree in, I believe, cryptography, eventually came and did your graduate schooling at Harvard Business School. Now you're in New York City. You're the founder of this company, Botanix, that is trying to bring spider chains to Bitcoin. Let me hand the mic to you, though. Please let the audience know what I might have missed there, and please include anything else about yourself that we should know.
No, absolutely. That's a lot of information. It's actually all correct. I'm surprised you all took that away. So yeah, no, exactly. Grew up in Belgium, having mathematics background. Became third in the national mathematics competition. It's actually there where the name Botanix comes from. When I became third there, I as a prize, you got this book about mathematics in nature, basically talking about all the fractals that you see in nature and about Fibonacci sequence. And it left quite an impression in the sense that I'm a strong believer now that the law of physics drives a lot of what we basically do in the world and drives a lot of things in the world. And like, you cannot fight the laws of physics really. And so I've always been fascinated by that. I think crypto and Bitcoin, the basics of it is just mathematics. And so I love that. And that's also where eventually I want to have something with mathematics in nature. And so Botanix is comes from that basically. And then I did electrical engineering actually in the bachelor's. So in Belgium you have bachelor's and masters, then masters again, but then I focused on cryptography. So I researched there in authenticated encryption. It's also, I focused there a little bit on forward secrecy, which is very big in encryption. It's also where later on in the spider chain, you'll see that we have forward security. So that's that same concept, but then brought to Bitcoin. Then after that, and it is indeed the university where also David Chaum was. Another person who was there is Len Sassaman. Not sure if you ever heard of him, but he was a very big CryptoPunk. Some consider him one of the potentials to be Satoshi. There's a few articles on that, which I think I'm very biased to that, so I ascribe to that theory because he was there at that moment. He knew Hal Finney, and basically they're in the KU Leuven, which is one of the biggest in cryptography in the world. They typically use their white papers in LaTeX, as you have seen. So the Bitcoin white paper is written in that. And then basically, I didn't go into cryptography after studying it. I went into chemicals. There's not that many tech jobs in Belgium, so I went into chemicals. That brought me to Saudi Arabia. And that's basically where I fully fell down the rabbit hole. Always had a big interest into macro and energy as well. So saw hyperinflation happening in Lebanon. Basically, once you're there, I was there in the protests against Hezbollah in like 2019, 2018. Wow. Saw hyperinflation happening there, or at least like the beginnings of it. You could really feel it. There was no escaping anymore then, even though inflation was like 20%. Now it's, of course, fully went into hyperinflation. But then I basically committed myself, okay, I need to spend all my resources, all my capabilities that I have to, make sure I help Bitcoin forward and make this succeed as soon as possible in the world, because you could really see like the world is moving faster and faster into a darker place, and I see Bitcoin as being really the light there. Yeah. And so I applied to HBS there, so the Harvard Business School, got in. It's basically when I moved to the US, and the moment I got in there, I started thinking about like, okay, how can I help this space forward? And then during school, I started hanging out more at MIT Bitcoin Club, at the Boston dApps, which is technical Bitcoin meetup. And basically, throughout that period, started researching very big in different cryptographic protocols, and eventually came up with what's now called the spider chain.
Amazing. People, I feel like people in this space have such incredible stories. Obviously, yours included in that. Very, very cool. You actually said something quite interesting to me. I think while you were, it was either MIT or Harvard, there was, well, I actually want to go back a little further. You talked about how when you first started going down the rabbit hole, you were writing articles about Bitcoin and trying to explain it to people, and it just wasn't resonating, wasn't connecting. People didn't totally get it. Has that changed at all when you talk with people about it now versus when you first started doing it? Has that changed, and what has changed?
Yeah, no, totally. I actually find that it is easier to orange pill people during the bear market than during the bull market, because in the bear market, you just talk about fundamentals, and the fundamentals are really there. And so actually a lot of people I met at the Harvard Business School were fully into crypto and very much into altcoins. And they basically didn't see it then, but I saw some of them, like, for example, 2 weeks ago back here in New York, and suddenly they see the big macro picture. And so the times, it's becoming more and more clear for people what the effect of inflation is. Like 5 years ago, you had to explain, there's going to be hyperinflation. They keep money printing. This creates a bunch of inequality. And you just sounded a lot like a conspiracy theorist. I think today, way more people just immediately understand that. And then you start understanding the gold, you start explaining the gold story, gold, sound money, basically the book of the Bitcoin standard. I recommend that to a lot of people. And I think I've orange pilled quite a lot of people over the last few years. Cool. So it's definitely changing. So I think as we're growing more and more and Bitcoin keeps remaining there, and especially I think the next bull run is going to be fully focused on Bitcoin and Bitcoin development and all dApps on Bitcoin. I think way more people will like slowly see the whole picture, and that's a crazy thing about Bitcoin. Once you get it, there's no way out of it anymore.
That's correct.
So the more people starting to get it, the more the user base ends up growing. The more people stacking sats, and then that's what we want. That's what's happening.
Yeah. It's a good way to put it. And even that in and of itself sounds kind of crazy, right? When you say like, once you get it, you can't unsee it. It sounds very cultish. And when you start talking about it, it sounds very crazy. For me, it was sort of difficult to start writing about it. I was a college lecturer and I was like, no, you know what I'm going to do is like focus my life on this thing that the majority of the world doesn't really understand yet. But, you know, my belief is that it needs people to explain it to them. And speaking of explaining things to them, dimensions of it to them, please, let them know what you're looking to contribute with Botanix and with spiderchains. Why does Bitcoin need or why do you think Bitcoin will benefit from what you're currently developing?
Yeah. So this is very long-term thinking, and I love how Bitcoin basically focuses short-time horizon on the long term. But imagine a world where the whole world works on Bitcoin. Right now, it's just a store of value, but before we go to a full unit of account, there's multiple steps we need to go through. And then you see basically the current financial system. You see all these stock markets, you see these derivatives, you see these trades, insurance policies, and there's so much into the current financial system that we will have to rebuild on top of Bitcoin. And then basically, I think during the last bull run, I tried to figure out where this whole infrastructure that's going to be needed for the financial system on Bitcoin is going to go to like 10 years from now. And I start seeing different things in the sense that now you have Bitcoin, which is really the money. And then I saw something happening, what you call virtual machines. So the virtual machines is like what you can use to build smart contracts. And so I saw a huge amount of applications that reached product market fit or basically reached adoption. And I think one of the really big things that opened my eyes was NFTs. While I was very skeptical of it, I totally saw it reach market adoption. Like I started talking with a lot of people who were very much into NFTs and trying to understand them. I saw that they didn't actually care about blockchain or about some money, but what drew them to NFTs was basically this idea of having something that is secured somewhere, and they don't really care where, but it's theirs, and it's somehow a status symbol. And so I always compared it to why people buy Ferraris. It doesn't make any sense. It's just vehicles are to get from one point to the other, and so with a Ferrari, it's a status symbol. And I started seeing the same human tendencies that you have there. And so I talked with a lot of NFT people, and that was really what drove them. And so that made the conclusion in my mind, okay, that it has reached product market fit. There's a market for that. And then, of course, you have the decentralized exchanges, which are stock markets. Basically, you can launch your own token, which is like your own stock. Then you can start trading it, which I think is very fair to have a decentralized exchange. Basically, right now, people living in, I don't know, Lebanon or Egypt, they probably cannot buy all the stocks they want in the world. And why is that? And should we like level that? And basically, if you have a decentralized exchange, that makes it permissionless for anyone in the world to buy any stock in the world. So I saw a lot of societal value in that. And so basically now you have a bunch of applications which product market fit, and they're built on virtual machines. So I figured out, how do I bring basically virtual machines or smart contracts on Bitcoin? And I started realizing that it's actually a different technology battle, what you're talking about. So on the one hand, you have the money battle or the currency battle, which is Bitcoin. By far, Bitcoin has won that, the most decentralized and more secure. It's the perfect money. But the virtual machine battle is a different battle. And I compare it more to like what we've seen in Windows in the 80s. And so I went down very deep in the rabbit hole. Why did Windows gain the most adoption there, even though it was not the best technology, it was not the most secure technology, and it was pure distribution. And that actually brought me to all the EVMs or the virtual machines that we have today. We've got Simplicity on Liquid. We've got Solana made their own virtual machine. Starkware made their own virtual machine. Stacks has their own virtual machine. But from each of all of these virtual machines, which one has the highest likelihood of winning out there? Just like Windows in the 80s, and that's the EVM. EVM is not the best technology. It's also not the most secure. A lot of applications on top of it get hacked, but it has the biggest distribution. today you can build any DEX tools, libraries. The EVM is like so big. There's I don't know, 100,000 EVM developers or Solidity developers.
Wow.
And so the distribution, and they're like way ahead of anything else. So basically the design came down to, how do I bring the EVM in a decentralized fashion to Bitcoin? Yeah. And if you read the white paper, that's the basics of what I wanted to do. That's what I realized like a year and a half ago or something. And that's where we wanted to build towards. And basically having that limited design space forced us to come up with what's now called the spider chain.
Amazing. There's a billion questions I have after reading the white paper and all this, but my big sort of overarching question is, I'm going to do my best to describe to the audience how something like the spider chain works, or how EVM is brought to Bitcoin. And also quickly, I just want to explain, actually, let me hand this to you. Could you quickly just explain what the blockchain trilemma is and why Bitcoin is the most secure blockchain?
Yeah. So the blockchain trilemma, it's basically three different things, and it says that you cannot have all three. So basically, on the one hand, you have decentralization. On the other hand, you have scalability. And the third one is security. And so in each of these angles, you can optimize for each of those three. So if you want to optimize for scalability, that's a little bit what Solana has done. Then you have basically very fast blocks, very fast transactions. And that's what the end user typically wants. They want fast transactions. They want to buy their coffee. Now, that also means that you will give up on decentralization and you will give up on security. So meaning you introduce a bunch of different attack vectors, which limits your security, and it limits your decentralization because you need very specific hardware. So basically only a few parties can fully run that. Yeah. And what Bitcoin has done is basically solve for two out of those three, meaning decentralization and security. Yep. Decentralization in the sense that any person in the world can run Bitcoin today. It's very easy to run. You can run it on a Raspberry Pi. That's about how decentralized you can get. Yeah. In terms of security, it went all the way. It's a very easy protocol, very limited attack vectors. One of the big things I took away from my cryptography background is you want to have a protocol that is as easy as possible to understand. If you use a lot of different designs and come up with a very bloated protocol, you have a huge amount of attack vectors. So you will see that any big designs always in the world are actually very easy to understand. And it makes so much sense. And it goes back to the nature. Nature is driven by some very easy mathematical formulas. And so it goes a little bit into the cryptography as well. So Bitcoin is a very easy, very lightweight protocol, very well made. The code is very clean. The cryptography is very clear. The incentives are very clear. And so in terms of security and decentralization, Bitcoin is unparalleled.
Thank you. That was a beautiful overview. And so I think I always think about what Jeff Booth says. He says, yeah, the basic protocol has to be very simple, and then complexity goes to sort of the outside, goes to the other layers or something like that. So the more complex things like the EVM, the Ethereum Virtual Machine, that can exist, but not on the base layer because you're compromising security and decentralization in that regard. Thank you for that overview. My question now is, okay, so generally speaking, the audience doesn't need to know, I don't think, too much of a sort of technical overview of this. So for something like a spider chain, what you're building to function, you would have what's called pegging in and out. So you take your Bitcoin, it gets pegged out, it turns into a synthetic Bitcoin, and then you can use that in a new network. My big question for you is, does that now mean you can use any of the dApps built on Ethereum with your synthetic Bitcoin? Like you can go and take out a loan from Aave or something like that?
Yeah. So the synthetic Bitcoin is a very low level name for it, but basically you have to consider that it's Bitcoin. anything that is not on the Bitcoin main chain is what I would call synthetic Bitcoin. It's just
Got
a
you.
number
Okay.
somewhere that doesn't run on the Bitcoin main chain. Now, to answer your question, it is exactly that. So all the dApps you have on Ethereum will run plug and play on the spider chain. And that's the very interesting part, because of course, when you look at Ethereum itself, nowhere in Ethereum, in the main code, it says this is Ethereum. It's just a bunch of numbers. And so you can interpret those numbers however way you want. And so we basically implemented that. It's a very clean fork of Ethereum itself. And you can interpret that as being Bitcoin. And so all your applications that you have on Ethereum, you can just copy your normal code. So plug and play. You deploy it on Botanix, and basically you'll be able to use Bitcoin in all of those applications. So think about all the wallets that you've seen for the users or for listeners that have used MetaMask and other Ethereum applications. It's exactly that. You'll see Bitcoin in your MetaMask. You'll see Bitcoin in everywhere. It's your native currency. You'll pay gas fees in Bitcoin. You'll pay transaction fees in Bitcoin. And it's actually quite mind-blowing to see, because when you start navigating and trying things out on Botanix, you always expect to see ETH there, but now you see Bitcoin there. So it's actually it's really cool. But yeah, it's basically we're an exact copy of Ethereum, but then running on Bitcoin. And it's actually Jameson Lobb that said I think in a Twitter Spaces like 2 weeks ago, it said like, yeah, anything always built outside of Bitcoin is basically considered like a test net. The idea was always that everything would come back to Bitcoin. So basically, that whole Ethereum was a very good experiment, so to say. But we can fully bring that to Bitcoin, and that's exactly what we're doing. So with Botanix, everything on Ethereum will be plug and play on top of us.
I mean, that is a tremendous that's a tremendous thing to have happen. But then I guess, so do you have then access to all of, this is where I'm a little bit confused, to access to all of the coins or tokens on top of Ethereum? So can you then plug in? So that's the part. Could you explain a little bit what that looks like? So how does Bitcoin work within those mechanisms on the Ethereum virtual machine, within those dApps and DEXes and all that? Because if you, let's say you wanted to trade your Bitcoin, maybe you wanted to just move it into like USDC for a period of time, would you just do that on Uniswap? But it would just, there'd be no ETH involved. It would just be trading Bitcoin from USDC. But then also, what is USDC then running on at that point? Is it running on it's running on so let me give a little background there. I'm sorry. So essentially, Botanix would be where the spider chain would be a proof of stake blockchain built on top of Bitcoin, which is a proof of work blockchain. So you have USDC on the proof of stake version of Bitcoin. Would that be a fair way to say it to the audience? Is that?
Yeah, let me clarify a bit. So basically, Botanix will be a clean slate. Imagine like you have nothing built on Ethereum, right? So everything will have to be redeployed. Now, that will be very easy because you can redeploy the dApps within a day. It's just a copy paste. But everything you'll have on Ethereum will have to be redeployed. And that is the hard part. And that's where the business side of things comes in, because you have huge network effects in Ethereum. Like you have all these applications interacting with each other, and like everyone is like playing with each other. And so you'll have to compete with those network effects. And to give an example of, for example, a token that's deployed on Ethereum, what would have to happen is you basically implement a bridge that says you burn your token on Ethereum and you get the same token back on Botanix. Now, that's nothing hard to do. That is a day of work. I actually talked with a protocol this week, and they said like, yeah, actually you might want to move like everything over, and then all the users that have our token can basically just burn on Ethereum and do it back again on Botanix. The interesting thing is that all that infrastructure is already been built, because you have to do the same thing if you go from Ethereum to like the second layer, like Arbitrum, for example. That's the same concept that's working there.
Wow.
So it's not unovercomable problem, but in the beginning, like you'll have nothing there. It's a blank space. You won't have any stable coins. You won't have any DeFi. Now, the interesting thing is that all of these things can come very, very fast. Like a stablecoin can deploy in a day or two. A Uniswap already is deployed on multiple EVM chains. So they will probably add Botanix at some point, we hope. And a lot of other protocols that run on multiple EVM chains can just take Botanix in as well. I hope this answers your question.
Wow. That's so my question then are these other issuers of the tokens, protocols, whatever, are they going to be pissed? I mean, are they going to be angry that essentially, because they get some sort of seigniorage on these coins? So is it going to cause sort of is there going to be pushback? Let me put it that way.
So yeah, I expect a lot of pushback. I've always figured out from the beginning that we were doing this, we're going to get pushback from the Bitcoin maxis and the ETH maxis. Bitcoin maxis because they don't like the EVM, which is interesting because the EVM has $200 billion on top of it. So it's kind of proven. And the ETH maxis think, of course, that Ethereum is the sound money or is the money. And so they won't like anything that's being built or ported over to Bitcoin. Now, I think for all the dApps itself, they'll have to make a choice. Do we stay purely on Ethereum or do we go to an EVM on Bitcoin? And I think the choice for them after a while will be easy because Bitcoin has $600 billion of potential capital and potential users. Now, in terms of, I didn't fully get the part where you said on seigniorage, because they can burn their asset on Ethereum and get the same asset on top of Botanix. So there won't be any change in assets there. Really. It's just like you swap from one chain and you get a new one on the other one, basically.
Okay. So, and then another thing. So you said both sides will sort of be frustrated to maybe some extent, but then I was reading the Bitcoin Magazine article from Shinobi on this, and his last sentence in that piece is really clever. He's just like, and for everyone that, doesn't like this, like, too bad, it's going to happen because there's no Bitcoin improvement protocol that's necessary for something like this. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct. So when we designed spiderchain, we had basically two limitations. We wanted it to be possible in current Bitcoin Core implementation, so no soft fork needed, and we wanted to build an EVM. And that brought us to the spiderchain. And so we don't need any soft fork. We don't need any approval. It's fully permissionless. We're going to build this. And if some apps don't want to come over, we can build it ourselves. Like we can build a DEX in a day. We can build a DeFi platform in a day. Like that's the power of the EVM. Everything is copy paste now. So we don't need any approvals. We're going to build this. It's happening. It's coming very soon. It's actually going very fast. So I think a lot of people will be, will have their minds blown once they see it.
I'm like, as I went further down the rabbit hole, Willem and I scheduled this interview about a week ago or so, and as I've gone further down the rabbit hole with what you're creating, I'm like, I don't see how this doesn't change everything. I don't even see a way in which this doesn't. So because the incentives to have all the sort of capabilities of the EVM, but with harder money, it just seems, I mean, unless you fully believe in the ultrasound money meme, which, Ethereum says it's ultrasound money. And let me put it this way. I'm very much in awe of the technology that's been created on Ethereum, but I really do believe in Bitcoin as sound money. So I don't like to talk about myself as a maxi or not a maxi. I just sort of look at it and say, like, I don't ever want to hear someone else say that they've created money. Bitcoin is money, period. That's my argument. But there's so much really interesting stuff happening on Ethereum. And I think the concept of NFTs, because humans like having this feeling of provenance, that they own this thing, and we live in a very digital world. So while I think I own 2 NFTs, they were for charities that I donated to. It's not really my thing, but I could see how it's other people's thing. So if basically all of this, if you can have all that capability with hard money, I mean it. It sort of blew my mind as I've been looking at it. So when does this come live? When do these capabilities? When can people use it?
Yeah, very good question. Before I go into that, let me add or piggyback on something you said there. I think what
Mm.
is a big game changer in thinking is realizing that there's a different technology battle happening between money, the base layer, and the virtual machine. And once
Yes.
you understand those things and you can separate them, you can start seeing the value. But it's very hard to explain. And that's where I think once people will be able to experience it, because people are visual people, they love to see things. Now we're just selling an idea. But once they'll be able to see this, it will click with a lot of people. That's a theory. And so when will you be able to see this? I hope in 2-3 weeks. Like where we are right
Wow.
now, we got a first version of the testnet running. The problem is like we're not going to go out with it because, as you know, if you start a blockchain, it's way harder to start making changes. Now we just like stop it, we restart it, we stop it, restart it. We can very quickly iterate. Once we go out on a testnet, you kind of want to have a stable version, and it becomes way harder to make changes. So expect that to be here in 2 or 3 weeks, and that's basically the
Wow.
estimate. We'll go in different stages. Basically, we're internal testing now. Then we'll go to partners who have expressed interest that they want to deploy on top of us to basically test out things that they can deploy in a day. Then we'll go to our community. So we have actually a lot of enthusiastic fans in our Discord and Telegram who are been waiting to test this out. So they'll be really the first testers, and then we'll go public on Twitter. And that's basically the launch plan. Gives us a staged plan to make sure that any bugs that come up, we can fix them along the way.
Wow. I'm struggling to do anything else the last few days as I've been reading about all this. I'm struggling to be able to focus on anything else because it seems like such a shift is about to occur. So let's also talk a little bit about, right now, I don't think as many people are talking about something like this, but a lot of people are talking about BitVM. That seems to be all the sort of rage right now. As I said, I'm not necessarily a technologist. Can you talk about how they're compatible? Can they coexist? Will they coexist? What is BitVM versus what you're creating?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think BitVM is a genius. Was a genius paper. Just breaking it down into logic building blocks, especially for all the electrical engineers out there. This is just going back to like building circuits. I love it. And I think it's very compatible. I think it's very early stages in the sense that I think a lot of improvements can be done on the base protocol of BitVM. I think Robin and a few others already had quite some good ideas to make it easier and to make it more malleable for multiple parties. But basically, after the BitVM paper, I very quickly realized that instead of going from one party to another party, you can have one party and n parties. And from there onwards, you can expand that because you want to be decentralized. You can go from m parties to n parties. And I think the more I think about it, is it's actually very compatible with what we're doing in the spider chain. So right now we have already actually part of our plugin or spider wallet, our decentralized multisigs are actually small bit VMs in the sense that they have like a small logic Boolean circuit behind it. It's not built with NAND gates, of course. It's a very specific circuit build. But we can expand on that to make even the spider chain more trustless, to even minimize trust even more. And so I think it's actually very compatible. I think we'll have to see the development of BitVM and the performance and new ideas come out over the next few months, maybe years. We all know how slow these things often go, like with the Lightning Network. After the paper, I think, well, I don't know, we're like 7-8 years along.
Yeah.
But I think it's absolutely groundbreaking. It will make a lot of different changes, will make new possibilities. And so I see a very big compatibility. I think at one point we'll probably use part of the BitVM in the spider chain.
Wow. Okay. So, and you've mentioned you've met Robin a few times. I mean, do you share ideas with one another to talk about the potential compatibility, or is it someone that you speak with? I know that you've spoken with him in, either, I think you have an interview with him and I think it's Paul Stork coming up online, but are you guys all in communication talking about what this future of this sort of these layer twos and what can be brought to Bitcoin or on top of Bitcoin? Is it a conversation that happens frequently?
Well, since the BitVM came out, I've been trying to avoid it because I know how the DMs look like, and I'm sure his DMs have blown up. I congratulated him, and we chatted a little bit. I'm sometimes active in the Telegram group of the BitVM, but I've met him for the first time, I think, last year at MIT Bitcoin conference, basically where I first launched the idea to him verbally of the spider chain. Then he also read the paper, I think, a bit later than that. But basically, one of the interesting things when I was building the spider chain and I came up with the spider chain, we started looking out, like, has anyone else done this? Like, how are we the first to come up with trying to build a proof of stake on top of Bitcoin? And then we realized that Robin actually wrote a paper in 2020, I think, called Stake Chains. And that's the first one that I'm aware of that actually had the idea of building a stake mechanism on Bitcoin. Now, our implementation is totally different, but he basically also started thinking about staking on Bitcoin and basically using that to secure something. And then I saw him back, like, I think a month or two ago at the conference in Atlanta, the DAppConf, where we exchanged some ideas. He really wanted to focus on building a trustless second layer on top of Bitcoin. I wasn't aware fully of the BitVM, but I was surprised as anyone. Yeah, he's a genius. Really like him. I'm looking forward to the chat on Friday. Always has good ideas. So.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Then my next question too is that now you have, so the thing that often gets thrown around. So like the metric that often gets thrown around is like how many people are developing on the chain. And that's sort of where the value is, like, oh, look how many developers Ethereum has versus Bitcoin. How many developers now come to you and say, I want to start developing on this layer two? Do you think ETH developers move over? So I think the big thing, so my editor, I also work for a company called Finder, and my editor is a lot more into Ethereum because he understands programming a little bit more, and that makes sense to me. Someone that feels like it's expressive to sort of deploy apps or something like that. That makes complete sense to me. Do you think those editors, I mean, my guess is that they understand the difference between Ether and Bitcoin as an asset. Do you think people just move over as soon as possible? Or do you think this is going to take time in terms of bringing the developers to you?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is, once you have an EVM on Bitcoin, then basically all those 100,000 Solidity developers are also Bitcoin developers, so to speak, not Bitcoin main layer, but they can build on Bitcoin. And if you look through history, basically after 2016, 2017, a lot of people moved away from Bitcoin because it's extremely hard to build on. And it wasn't a good solution. And they all went to Ethereum and started developing there because it's way easier. And it's like you just take the easiest path often to develop something that you want to develop. And what's interesting over the last few months, we had a lot of inbound interest because a lot of people who've been developing on Ethereum still have a love for Bitcoin because they still consider Bitcoin real money. Yeah. Like really decentralized, secure. And so I think those will come over back very, very quickly. But it will be like an S-curve in the beginning, like the real Bitcoiners that are actually in Ethereum will come very fast back to Bitcoin. But then, the mass adoption will probably try to play both sides. And then like the real ETH maxis that don't see any value in Bitcoin, I think they'll be the last ones to move over. That's how I think about it. But I was very surprised to actually learn that so many people in the Ethereum world and outside of Ethereum even actually still fully love Bitcoin. and they stopped following what was happening in Bitcoin because like there was not a lot of things happening, right?
Right.
Not a lot of development was happening, but that's now totally changing and moving back. And Ordinals was the first one that basically showed that any application that reached product market fit outside of Bitcoin will reach product market fit on Bitcoin. But yeah, that wave is coming back. I think the next bull run, there's going to be so much built on Bitcoin. So that's very exciting to be at the start of it. But things can go very, very fast.
I'm like, I'm literally, I'm having trouble processing all this, to be really honest. It's like, it seems like such a sea change is we're on, like maybe 2-3 weeks away from such a massive shift. And what I love about it is that you don't even have to use it if you just want to hold your Bitcoin in cold storage on the main chain. It doesn't do anything to the Bitcoin protocol. It doesn't change anything. That's the part that I love. It's completely optional. You can do this if you want to do it, if you want to use whatever decentralized finance services. And it's hard. Please.
And I totally think that's where the future is going. Like you will have your savings in your cold wallet, but as with your normal bank account as well, like you have some of your money in investment accounts, in other accounts, and those will be on your hot wallets, in your MetaMask, but you'll always keep your savings in your cold wallet. And so that's totally where I think the future is going to go to as well.
That is mind-boggling. That's like, I think that makes complete sense. I had a bunch of other questions, but I'm sort of struggling to process right now. But potential, what are the, let's dive into maybe not being super excited about it and looking at the potential issues. What are some of the potential security threats of something like this, a layer 2 built on Bitcoin?
Yeah. So we want to be absolutely as transparent and honest as possible about what the trust model is. I think me as a person very much coming from the Bitcoin side, always annoyed when a lot of projects don't show how it's built. And I'm like, if I cannot understand how it works, like how can I ever trust it? And so we want to be fully transparent in the trust assumptions. You also see in the paper that we'll look at all the different known attacks that we've been able to come up with, like your standard hostage, Sybil attacks, and so on. And so to answer your question very succinctly is the trust model is that the stakers are decentralized. Okay. Basically, everyone running a full node is decentralized. And then basically immediately leads to your big attack vector. What if only 1,000 Bitcoin is staked? What if someone comes in with 5,000 Bitcoin and takes over the protocol? Now, that's where forward security comes in. They won't be able to steal any Bitcoin. But it also means they can halt the chain, and we want to avoid that. And that basically leads us into we'll work in a permissioned way, in the sense that we'll start off with a few selected partners that have a lot of Bitcoin and can grow with the protocol until enough Bitcoin is staked. And after that, anyone will be able to run a full node, which differentiates us from any layer 2, by the way. There's not a single layer 2 except for the Lightning Network where you can run your own node. And so we will build a dashboard that shows how decentralized we are. And in the beginning, of course, this will show it's 100% Botanix or it's 75% anyone else. And so that becomes clear, okay, now where our trust model is, we need to trust Botanix, which is actually the same as with Liquid. Now you trust Blockstream. It's the same as with Arbitrum. Now you trust Arbitrum. And we just want to be very transparent at that. But over time, we hope that basically enough people will join, we get traction, and you become very decentralized. And then after a while, your decentralization pool becomes, very, very big. But initially, the trust model will be that we will be centralized, which I think is fair. Bitcoin was very centralized in the beginning as well. The Lightning Network, there's a lot of examples on that. You don't launch a decentralized network from day one. It goes over time, and I think we've got the right protocol and incentives that will decentralize it over and over time, more and more and more. And so as long as your trend is towards decentralization, I think that's a good thing. Initially, basically, the trust assumption is that people use the protocol, trust Botanix as being the centralized party.
Okay. Wow. And I want to get into one quick thing for people who are a bit more technical minded out there, and please sort of expand on it or clarify what I'm saying here. So, from my understanding, you're taking certain elements of other. I guess is liquid, yeah, lightning and liquid are considered layer twos. So you have from liquid, you're taking this idea of a multi-sig. So you have a multi-sig federation. Money is coming in based on multiple people signing to allow that money into the federation or the layer two. Lightning, same sort of thing. And like you said, people can run nodes on Lightning. It's kind of decentralized in its own manner, maybe becoming more so over time. What else is there from a technical angle that people should understand about what you're doing? And we don't have to get too far into exactly what multisig is or anything like that, but just to give a bit of a technological overview, because now I guess in my head, being someone that's not super technical, I'm hearing proof of stake and then this the idea of running a node. So do you then take the Bitcoin that you have, use that to stake it to then run a node that way? Is that how it works? And then the more people that do that, the more decentralized the network becomes.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few innovations in the whole protocol that are quite new. But let me break down the biggest interesting ones. I think one big breakthrough is decentralized multisigs. The big issue that I always saw, and that was always my pet peeve, is any layer 2 protocol, any application is always a centralized multisig. It's just a company that is running it. And how do you decentralize multisigs? And that's basically what we've solved.
I want to quickly explain that to the audience. So for something like Blockstream, who developed the liquid layer 2, basically people have to sign off on that Bitcoin coming over from the main chain into the federation, the liquid federation. What you're saying is you've created a decentralized multi-sig where it's not like 11 people sitting in a room signing off on the multi-signature wallet. It's people that don't know each other, and you've decentralized. I just wanted to clarify that for the listeners, for people who don't necessarily understand as well. So please continue.
Absolutely. Maybe an advice I have for any of the listeners: if you want to figure out if something is actually decentralized, there's two questions to ask. Who controls the keys and who can upgrade the code? Those are basically the two main questions, and that answers to you if something is decentralized or not. And so how do we make decentralized multisigs? Like you said, Liquid has 15 people and they control all the Bitcoin. How we did it is you basically create a sequence of multiple multisigs. And in that sequence, for every multisig, you will choose random participants. So for example, if you have 10,000 stakers, 10,000 different entities that have staked Bitcoin, we will choose randomly 100 participants out of those 10,000, and they will secure one single multisig. And so as long as your 10,000 is decentralized, your random 100 participants for one single multisig is decentralized. And then you will create a new one, and a new one, and then another one. And so basically, by creating multiple multisigs, you create capital efficiency, where basically no one who is staking, so one person out of that 10,000 will actually control a lot of Bitcoin. They will have almost zero control over any of the Bitcoin in the spider chain. So that's one big breakthrough. Now we've decentralized multisigs. All the multisigs are a fixed amount of people, but they're randomly chosen from a decentralized pool. And then a second big breakthrough is the forward security. Let me know if you want to ask a clarification question.
No, I mean, there's only so much, like I said, as a non-technical or someone who's aspiring to be a technical person. I showed it to Willem beforehand, but I'm doing my trying to learn the technical side as much as possible. I completely get that idea, and I think what always felt a little bit weird to me, my understanding of Blockstream, was this idea of people being involved on that level. Like, okay, let's all sign this transaction to allow this Bitcoin into our layer 2. This idea, for me, I'm sort of just in awe of not only the fact that you thought to do that, but have figured out a way to execute it. So if it looks like I have a confused face, it's more of like a being in awe that, like, wow, what a brilliant idea. And and I guess there's a part of me that thinks why didn't people either think of this or execute this earlier? Maybe you could actually answer that question before you go on. Is it very difficult has it been very difficult to execute, or is it just a concept that most people hadn't really considered?
Yeah, why didn't anyone come up with this? I think it's very interesting. I asked myself that question as well. And then we realized that Robin has came up with stake chains. So we realized the idea of staking on top of Bitcoin. Why hasn't anyone realized this idea of basically having decentralized multisigs? I think few things happened. This wasn't possible before Taproot. So it wasn't even in the design space. You couldn't make this before Taproot. And a second thing was like we basically boxed ourselves in the sense that we wanted to have the EVM, which forced us to basically build a collateral layer on top of Bitcoin and not basically have a directly translation back to the main chain. And so basically boxing ourselves in of decentralizing the multisigs, having Taproot, and wanting to build an EVM that basically changed the way we had to think about designing this. And then we went from so many different designs. We actually at some point started from the Lightning Network, realized, okay, that's all just 2 out of 2 multisigs. Can we increase that to like channel factories? And then started realizing with the Lightning Network, we actually, if you want to build smart contracts on that, we can actually strip down a lot of the things in the Lightning Network. And what actually just makes it decentralized is the multisigs. So let's double down on the multisigs and start creating a pattern that makes it decentralized. And that's a little bit how the design evolved over time.
Wow. That's mind-boggling. Anyway, please continue. That was the first dimension you were describing. You were about to move on to the second.
Yeah, so first big innovation, decentralized multisigs. And then the second part came after that. Now, any layer 2 always has to be more secure than a layer 1. And that's an interesting concept. But if you attack a layer 1, the value of the native currency goes to 0. So attackers don't steal anything.
Yeah.
If you attack a layer 2, you can steal actual Bitcoin, which you can sell. So your layer 2 actually has to be more secure. And so realizing that you need to protect.
I'm a little confused. I mean, if the layer 1 gets attacked, the Bitcoin, even that you would be able to steal on the layer 2, would be worthless anyway. So why? I'm not sure I follow the logic that the layer 2 has to be more secure than the layer 1.
Yeah, let me re-explain. So for example, let's take a Solana. If someone breaks Solana, the value of the Solana coin goes to 0. So the attacker has stolen something of 0 value. Now, for us as a layer 2, if someone attacks Botanix or the spider chain, they'll be able to steal actual Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin still has value. And so the risk reward balance is like all the way to the other side. And so you need to make your layer 2 actually more secure.
Got it. Okay.
And that's where we came up with the forward security. So forward security is a second big innovation. And there my cryptography background comes in because I researched in forward secrecy from encryption. And we copied the same concept there. Basically, we realized if someone takes over 2/3 majority, they could steal the Bitcoin. You could imagine a second layer with one big multisig of 10,000 participants. That's not possible, but imagine that. If someone gets 2/3 majority of that one big multisig, that big honeypot, they can steal all the Bitcoin. And so you want to avoid that. And that's where we came in with, okay, what if we make sequential multisigs? And then we use LIFO management. At some point in time, if someone gets control of 2/3 majority, they have 0 control over all the previous or the older multisigs. The only thing that they can have control over is all the future multisigs. And so suddenly you have forward security, which is a huge concept actually in encryption. And I think this is part of the design of the sidechain that typically people glance over, but it actually is extremely important because any attacker will be disincentivized. Like, why would I attack? Risk so many stake because they'll have to stake Bitcoin that can get slashed to then be able to steal exactly 0 Bitcoin. So basically that takes away a huge amount of attack vectors.
And you're the first person to design what you just described. I'm sorry, remind me, say it one more time if you don't mind. Forward
security.
Forward security. So this is the first time something like that will be implemented with Bitcoin involved.
Yeah, so in the whole of cryptocurrency, I think no one has actually implemented forward security.
Wow.
But it's a big concept in encryption. And it's a concept that we inherited from there and basically brought to protocol design.
That's so. This sounds silly, but like, why aren't more people talking about this? I mean, I know that amongst Jameson Lobb, maybe some of the people that I see follow you, Eric Wall, like I'm sure that they have some understanding of all this. But is it just because nothing has gone live yet? Do you think? Do people just need to see what this looks like in reality and practice?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept that people don't fully realize. And I think once there will be some money on Botanix or Bitcoin, people will start to try to think like, hey, is this even safe? How can we attack this? And then I think that's when the forward security will become more important and people will realize like, hey, they won't actually be able to steal any Bitcoin because it's forward secure. So right now it's neat, it's cool. A few people realize the impact of it, but I think that will take some time.
That's wild. This is my first thought when I was speaking with you in person. I'm thinking to myself, like, you talked about your background in math. You seem to have, a great amount of talent, intelligence when it came to this in a technical sense. How did going to business school help you then or what did business school help you conceptualize Botanix? Did it even help you further conceptualize the concept of a spider chain? And then also, how did business school help you prepare to, I guess, fundraise and do all the other sort of things that you need to do in the real world to bring these projects to life? What was that experience like?
Yeah, that was actually super interesting. I realized a lot of different gaps I had in my thinking. I always believed in this pure world, and I think a lot of engineers actually have this, where they just think it's all numbers, and they start to approach the world into just numbers, or they break it down. It's like, oh, this is just that, and then it's just that. But a business school basically made me realize that the whole world works on people. And you can have the best designs out there and launch in the world, and it will be a ghost town because you don't solve a person problem or a people problem. And so I think it is helping me a lot now, because now I start to realize basically the big marketing battle and the big business battle we have against us, because Ethereum has so much network effects. And I think it's one of the reasons why you haven't seen big adoption, for example, on the Lightning Network or on Liquid. Because at this moment, they don't really solve a customer problem. Like Lightning Network is the technology that we will need in 15 years from now, when Bitcoin is a unit of account. But today, which actual customer problem does it solve? And you can question that. I think it's one of the main reasons we haven't seen massive adoption there. If you compare that to the stable coins, for example, the stable coins have reached massive adoption because it solves an actual problem. You want to pay someone in your unit of account across the world. And that's an actual acute customer problem. And so I started to think way more from a people side of things, from a business side of things. And it also pushes me more to think otherwise on the business. Often in the business, you would think, we don't have adoption, so we have to improve our engineering side of things, or there's something wrong with the product. But often it's also just how you have to look at the customer, and are you actually solving a customer problem? It's maybe sometimes more important. And so I think any successful business, and I'm not talking about crypto design or Bitcoin, because I don't think Bitcoin needed that. But in other businesses, you need both to solve a customer problem and both to have a really good technology. And I feel like you need to have both. I also realized being in business school, I was really the only Bitcoiner there. And it also pushed me to realize that NFTs have reached product market fit, because I was in an environment between people that thought completely different than me. And while they completely dismissed Bitcoin, I maybe before dismissed all the rest. And so by just talking to a lot of those people and understanding why, for example, they believe massively in NFTs, but really don't care about blockchain, for example,
Yep.
made me realize that, there's a way bigger world out there, and basically pushed me to realize, okay, the EVM is probably the winning virtual machine. Bitcoin is probably the winning money, and put those pieces together. So always being in an environment where you're around people that think completely different than you is extremely powerful.
And I think that's a really important thing to it brings up something. I wrote a piece for NASDAQ called Bitcoin is a Store of Values. And in the piece, I broke down why Bitcoin is money, but also didn't dismiss Ethereum. I basically said, like, look, there are these there are these things to benefit. And I also, you have to give credit to the engineers just from a technological angle for moving the network from proof of work to proof of stake. To proof of stake. I don't think it was a good idea personally, but but you have to give like technological credit. That's very difficult to do. It's whatever. I think Camila Russo from the Defiant said something like, it's like whatever, changing the engine on a plane while it's in flight or something like that. And I think that there's a lot of truth there, but I think that I think what you've done is really amazing, because it is very easy to be very tribal in this space, to just believe in Bitcoin, to just believe in Bitcoin as money. And I get that. And I think it's important that there are sort of like tribes to defend that. I'm part of that tribe for sure. But it also is really important to think about things like you just said in a bit more of a nuanced way, where you're kind of like, what is working with people? What is sort of what's resonating with people? What seems to be something that's part of the human experience that people want? That what you've done, and I think is brilliant in that regard. It's really important, but it's also very hard to do in such a tribal atmosphere. But I think what feels great about this is that you never have to interact with Botanix, spiderchains, whatever, if you don't want to. But if you do want to use the most pristine collateral the world has ever existed, Bitcoin, to do certain things that have been created on this sort of these, decentralized finance apps and all this kind of stuff, to purchase NFTs, whatever it is, you can. So it stays completely optional. The base chain for Bitcoin doesn't get affected at all. I think my last question, and I'm not very well versed in this, the process of pegging the Bitcoin in and out. Does this look more like a bridge? Because we always hear about bridges getting hacked in the crypto space. What does that process of pegging Bitcoin in and out look like? And does it affect, I know that with drive chains, we talked about how it would affect miners a little bit. There's a bit of an incentive where miners could make money off of this. Are there security issues with pegging in and out? What did you have to consider when considering pegging this Bitcoin in and out of the first and second layer, or moving it from the first to second layer?
Yeah, multiple questions there.
I'm sorry.
So number one,
yeah.
No, that's okay. I think one is it compared to all the bridge hacks that we've seen? That's totally not the case. All the typical bridge hacks actually happen typically between different layer ones, when you move from one layer one to the second layer one. And the biggest issue always there is that you have to trade different coins. So you go from one coin to the other coin, and like, which prices are you trading against, and which price from the Oracle do you use? And there's a lot of it's never decentralized. There's always different attack vectors. And that just gives rise to, very vulnerable bridges. So here, we call it also a bridge because you bridge to the second layer, but you don't have those typical vulnerabilities. So that's one. A second, the comparison with drive chains, we actually don't impact the main layer at all. So there's no change of incentives for the Bitcoin main layer. It's actually beneficial in the sense that Bitcoin will have more utility. So right now there's not a lot of utility, and by having Botanix, suddenly you will have more utility. So there's a bigger incentive to hold your Bitcoin. And that gives me to the third question: how does the pegging actually work? It's actually extremely user-friendly. So I started to realize that the user-friendliness and user experience is super important. And so bridging into Botanix is actually just as easy as sending Bitcoin to a certain Bitcoin address. So That's where the part of the BitVM comes in, like in the Taproot leaf or the program that we built behind one single Bitcoin address. We actually put your EVM address. So before you plug in, you will have to sign a certain message with your EVM address, and that will link your EVM address to that specific Bitcoin address. So in the background, we know that you basically did a plugin into Botanix. And so it feels as seamless as just sending Bitcoin from one address to a second address, and then boom, you have Bitcoin in your MetaMask.
Yep.
That's how it feels like. Security-wise, it's of course secured by the proof of stake, and the spider chain and the decentralized multi-sigs that we talked about earlier. That provides the security.
Wow. My thoughts here. So one thing I didn't mention earlier as you were talking about it, back in 2015-16, you mentioned a lot of developers left Bitcoin because it was quite difficult to develop on the base layer on Bitcoin. And I mean, even Vitalik himself said, I created Ethereum because it was so difficult to work on Bitcoin. How does Vitalik respond to something like what you've created? What could be his logical response to it?
That's a very good question. So I haven't spoken to Vitalik yet. I'm quite sure he doesn't know about us yet. But at some point, yeah, I guess that will happen. I don't know him, so I'm not sure how he will respond to this. I think maybe good in the sense that it's very neat engineering. On the other hand, we won't have the different, like we won't solve the scalability trilemma, so probably we'll have layer 3s, etc. And maybe like in Ethereum main layer has a lot of plans to solve scalability more on the main layer. So yeah. It's a very, very big guess. I don't know.
Interesting. And then I think the last question I have is, do you think there are some people who, I mean, it sounds silly, but like who might actually, or maybe Ethereum will have some staying power because people don't want it to be ultrasound, like people don't want it to be like the hardest money ever created, meaning if Ethereum eventually, my guess is that it has to inflate. I know I've listened to multiple people much smarter than I. Arthur Hayes has had a lot of really good commentary on this, how he's saying like for now it can sort of be this, they could sort of play this deflationary narrative, it can do what it's doing, but eventually it's going to inflate. So does Bitcoin become the sort of Austrian option if you want to do whatever, use money and do DeFi? And does Ethereum become the Keynesian option for people who don't really care if the money inflates or if the security is all that great or blah, blah, blah? Do you think that is potentially the world we go into?
Yeah, that's a very hard prediction. I think throughout the last thousands of years, we've always seen gold, silver, and bronze being used. So there's a lot of like, the theory already exists, like you have Bitcoin and then you have Litecoin, both will exist. Will there be one coin or will there be multiple coins, and how many then? Is that going to be a handful? Is going to be 100? So I think that's very hard to predict. In terms of the inflation of Ethereum, I think it will also depend a lot on like how much activity still stays around there. Maybe they reach a certain product market fit in certain areas. Like another way I've always said is like Monero has shown that privacy in blockchain has a market. Solana has shown that there is a market for actually really high speed. Think about gaming. Gaming really likes that. And so maybe there is some product market fit there, but I think a lot of the activity will basically run on Bitcoin as being the single reserve currency. There's always been a single reserve currency in the world. And I fully believe there will stay again. Will there be others? How many? How big are they going to be? I don't know. That's very hard to predict. But I do believe the whole world will run on Bitcoin.
That's amazing. And just one last macro question. Do you think, Jeff Booth has talked about this a bit, and I find his commentary on it really interesting. If the dollar is on its way out from being the global reserve currency, if we don't really know yet, and some people speculate that China doesn't really even want to be the global reserve currency, time frame, odds of that really becoming Bitcoin, maybe, I think you mentioned 15 years. Does it feel like that's the amount of time we would need realistically for it to even be considered for something like that, or for it to just become something like that? Sort of, as a pseudo default? I don't know. How does it look in your head for the sort of just complete mainstream adoption of Bitcoin? Everyone's sort of using it, and it's a global reserve currency.
Yep. I think it's gonna go faster than people think. So I would give it like 10, 15 years. I actually think in terms of adoption, I think this is how it will probably play out, is very big from a macro perspective. I think suddenly the whole world has been looking for a new reserve currency. Like everybody's tied to the dollar and they cannot get out. There's no alternative. Like BRICS has come out over like the last 2 years. We want to make their own currency, but yeah, there's no real option. I know China, do they want or do they not want? I know Russia as well would love to be it, and they all have their own SWIFT system now. Of course, when they start trading internationally, each one of those will want to use their own SWIFT. But Russia, of course, doesn't want to use China's SWIFT. China doesn't want to use Russia's SWIFT.
Right.
Iran doesn't want to use either of those. And so suddenly, after a long enough timeline, they'll realize that there's actually a neutral currency there that is limited in supply. And so I think actually the first big adoptions in the real world of Bitcoin will be international trades, will be probably the commodities again. We've seen that play out first in the 1800s. Like being the oil trades between Saudi and the rest of the world. I think those type of trades, very international commodity trades, will be big drivers in the coming 5 to 10 years of Bitcoin. And after that, so it will keep rising, and then it will flow further down the line and eventually become a unit of account. I think my best guess is global reserve currency than 15 years. 20. I always said 2030, but that's only 7 years now, so maybe that's too short now. But 2035.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it could also the process could be it could happen a lot faster than people think if we see a reaction to CBDCs worldwide, like we saw in Nigeria. You know, if we really see people say like, no, I don't want my transactions censored. I want my complete freedom to do what I want with the money that I hold. And hopefully at that point, once people start learning that lesson, Bitcoin is a multi-trillion-dollar asset and the volatility won't scare so many people off anymore. Obviously, the bigger issues around that still need to be how legally it's regulated, whether or not it becomes legal tender in more countries, in the US, wherever. Because if it is something that you constantly sort of have to track and pay your whatever 15 to 30%, capital gains on, obviously this is going to hinder things a bit. So there's a lot that would need to happen, but yeah, it could happen quickly. The fact that it's permissionless might force governments to make it happen quickly. So we'll see what happens, but that's a whole different conversation. I want to just do a quick apology to the more people who are a bit more sort of technology minded, who understand this technology better. I apologize if I didn't necessarily ask the right questions here. Willem, you did a great job of explaining this to, I think, people who are more like myself, have a grasp of the basics of the technology, but don't necessarily have the same sort of schooling or background that you have. But I want to, open up the floor before we wrap up. Anything you want to add? Where can people... You mentioned you had a Telegram group, Discord, whatever it is. Where can people find what you're doing? How can they get ready to use what you're doing? When can they get ready to use it? Please direct them to websites, Telegram groups, Discords, whatever it is you'd like to share with them.
Yeah, I would like to share, definitely stay in contact, follow what we're doing. And then once we have a testnet, try things out. And maybe for the people who have been wanting to go into the space for a long time, once I did it, I really love it. Maybe try deploying an app on Botanix, try make the financial system run on Bitcoin. That's where we're going to go to. Go full time in the space, but stay close. And definitely we'll have an uphill battle. So if you fully align with what we've said, in terms of the EVM and Bitcoin, it's a tribal uphill battle. So definitely spread the word and help us out.
Yeah, and please tell people where they could find you online. Do you prefer, do you use Nostr, or do you prefer to be found on Twitter, X, or LinkedIn, or what?
Yeah, so the best way is Twitter. So we have Botanix Labs, and then my personal account is my name. Also on LinkedIn and Nostr, even though I haven't used Nostr that much yet, but Twitter is definitely the best place.
Okay, cool. I'm in awe of what you're creating. I'm very glad that I thought to walk up, that we had this conversation we had after that meetup at PubKey. This is great. Yeah, I'm amazed. I wish you all the best. I'm looking forward to using what you've created myself. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your day, given everything you have going on right now. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me over, Frank.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right. We'll leave it there, everybody. Talk soon.